Namaskar. I'm speaking on behalf of all my co-panelists. We are very happy to be here at the India Ideas Conclave. But I would say two little things, alterations, which perhaps would be the key ideas of arrangements for next time, because we all plan to be here over and over. Ideas develop over time and relationships build over time. One is, instead of the gender imperative, why don't we look at it as the imperative of gender equality? That is what we actually mean. It has to be done. It is imperative. So that's the word that we want to underline. Secondly, we still, unfortunately, as is visible here, seem to be very much a divided society. We are dividing this session into two. There is also a division as a women's session, whereas we are half the universe. Why can't women be in every session? And why can't some men be up here? Because there have been very good voices among the men on various issues, on justice, on being the last woman and not the man. So I would say that we have to change our very own mindsets about making it an equal society, equally participative. And inclusiveness doesn't mean other religions. It basically means what is the only thing that actually divides humanity as God-given or nature-given or however we want to call it, and that is by gender. Every other division is man-made, and I would underline man, not women-made. Now, therefore, rather than be a divided society, if we want to be a separate society, perhaps we also need to look at women as to how they look at themselves and be a little self-critical. As I came here day before yesterday, the media of the conclave asked, what exactly do I want to say and what is my view of this session? And I said something which perhaps most feminists would not like, but I would be assured that those who are on the dais, on the panel with me, eminent speakers, eminent activists, eminent social workers, practitioners, political people, have never put themselves forward just as feminists. Feminists, again, puts you in a box. I would rather say that we are just half of humanity, and it is irrelevant whether we are men or women, as long as we are given equal opportunity to perform and present ourselves and make our own choices about whether we want to stay at home or work, how we want to dress and how we want to think and what we want to do. And unless we begin to respect ourselves as equal human beings and get out of this victimization syndrome, we need to look at ourselves freshly and newly at that. There was a recent study done by the World Bank, and it's still dated next year, which has done a study about minds and beliefs and ideas in society. And they did a study, caste-related study, which had people of different castes coming in to do an exercise. And they asked them their castes, and then made them sit down and do that exercise. The people of backward castes, scheduled castes, the underclasses and undercastes, you would say, all performed badly. In another room, when they were not asked their castes and were not made conscious of their castes, they all performed better. Now, there is an issue in there of, did they feel conscious as victims, which made them lose their own self-respect in their own eyes? Did they feel self-conscious, lack confidence, and is that why they underperformed? As long as we go on saying that women are weak, women need protection, women need to stay at home, women have to cover themselves from head to toe, women will never get out of this victimization syndrome. And I think that is something I would like to express, that I think my panel would agree, that this is a message that's coming across from us. If women's issues are issues of humanity, let's not have these divisions, either at conclaves like this, and even if you look at political parties, there's always a women's cell. I agree there should be methods and opportunities for incubating to raise women's capacities and to raise their confidence. I myself studied in one of the most liberal, liberated colleges in the US, the Smith College, which brought out Gloria Steinem, Betty Friedan, The Feminine Mystique, the book that really changed the world's attitude towards women and what they felt, was published in 1963, the year I actually graduated from that college. She was an earlier alumni, Gloria Steinem as well. We look at Indian feminists differently when we in fact had women before feminism was spoken about in public fields, right? If you just start at the freedom movement and go backwards, no women felt confined. But somehow over the years, Western feminists have taken over. Their ideas of what feminism has taken over. Whereas in India, women actually, in their own minds, if you don't impose caste and religion and gender on them, perform equally and feel as self-confident. So I would again say, whatever methodologies we have, let's find ways of equalizing rather than dividing. And if there has to be positive discrimination, which we all feel through reservations of some sort or the other for caste or gender, it has to be from a point where first you provide equal opportunity, and then you can have positive discrimination. If as a man and a woman equally capable, okay, give the woman a chance. But if you start pushing up the incapable, whether they're anything, we're not really bringing about anything but hostility towards that group in society and more opportunities to oppress. Why the imperative also is because all over the world, today there are changing populations. Underutilization of talent is being noticed. If 50% of the population is not utilized to their full capacity, how can the world function in any kind of a sustainable way? So sustainability doesn't just mean the environment, it also means sustainability of human endeavor, opportunities for human endeavor, and how do you get a balanced approach to any social, political, any other kind of problem. In China and Japan, you have large populations. You have Europe with populations that are dwindling. Workforces are dwindling. And are we going to have just male immigrants go from here and there, getting dropped into the sea as they did outside in the seas in Italy or in Greece, or have hostility in their host countries where they're not hosted at all? Or do we have women in all those countries also given equal opportunity? There is a very important aspect which Lalita will speak about, the economic condition and the empowerment of women. I attended this year, and I'm sorry, the former leader of Jordan he is in the room perhaps. There was a UNDP conference in Amman, Jordan, in early April this year. And I was struck by the number of women who had come from all the Middle Eastern countries, all dressed in a variety. Some had blue jeans and all of that, and some were covered from head to toe, but their contributions were so erudite, so progressive, so liberal, and we got to know the kind of systems that have been put into place for women or not put into place for women in the Middle Eastern countries. And while I was there listening to them, I felt that we really should invite those women for a conference to India, because they were all Muslim women. And the way they were speaking about things that they have fought for in their own countries. Did we know that Morocco probably has a most progressive form of ideas for governance to bring women in? What women are doing in Syria, what is happening in Egypt. Very interesting, fascinating, and I felt that every Indian Muslim woman who is today being told to stay home and cover herself up should hear what her counterparts are doing in the Middle East. So I would like the Idea Conclave, Ram Madhav ji, to think about reaching out to those people and calling them for a conference here under the India Foundation perhaps, where we can discuss these things across the board as to how their governments have focused on issues relating to women. The economic power, as I have seen it, you have in rural areas women who earn and hand over all their money to the men. You have situations where women have earned and brought entire families out of drought-ridden poverty because where the fodder dried up and the cattle died, through their embroideries, whatever the climate or season or lack of rain, they were able to reach the market and keep their families maintained. There has been mention about tourism and culture and all of that. Women are the ones who sit in their homes and make baskets, do embroideries, weave textiles, do a whole lot of activity, which today, when translated into economic activity, is huge. I myself run small marketing events, and just 100 people can do a sale of 5 to 9 crores with their handmade goods in just 2 weeks' time. This is the kind of money that goes back into homes where women spend it on looking after their cows, children's education, new roof, new chula, and doing things where if the money is in their hands, the men don't go off and drink. There was a whole village in Kerala which we turned away from prostitution because the men were drinking up all the money and the women were having to go out and sell their mud pots, and the men thought that they were selling themselves and not the mud pots. We changed the whole situation around, but it shows how economic activity is so crucial in the rural areas, especially put into the hands of women. Reservations are another issue. I don't know if it'll come up today, but it's something where we have to think of why it's not happening. There was a time earlier when all women were considered oppressed, whether it was an upper caste woman or anything. Today, the reservation issue does not come up because it's divided again on caste. So we get back to being divided to allow men to keep power. But yet, if we look down on into our grassroots cultures, I came across a beautiful folk song which said that it's a potter and a weaver and a boatman, a farmer, singing as to lamenting in a way that why did Sita not get born into their families, because she instead went off and married a Raja's son, and look what happened to her. That they felt they could care for her better. That was a big question on class and caste. And it was about the beauty of nurturing a woman as a woman should be, instead of sending her off to prove her fidelity elsewhere. So these are stories that have come out of India, and we need to revive them, go back into our cultures and look at all these things, and bring back woman into the place that she had long, long ago. Colonialism, in fact, killed the matrilineal system in my own society, where we as women ran the households, the lineage came through us. When we were born, we didn't have disappointed mothers and fathers looking at us. They were rejoicing because we were girls. And that was what kept the population rate down in Kerala. And the New York Times once said, Kerala is a place where the population is kept down, but not the women. But today, all sorts of things have changed. The British came in with their Victorian ideas and said that we women were all promiscuous. And then the Hindu Marriage Act changed that. So today in Kerala, women are hanging themselves because they don't find husbands. So we need to look at our society much more deeply, and I'm sure my eminent panelists will give you different facets which will make up this.
My namaskars to all. This conclave is focused on the central theme, integral human development. So every topic, every issue, we have to see in that context. So what is integral human development? That human being is integral, is connected, is part of the family, the society, the whole creation. So when we say development of a man, it is not at the cost of family, at the cost of society, at the cost of environment, the creation. Because the whole existence is interconnected, interrelated, interdependent, because it is one which has manifested as many. When we say one which has manifested as many, some three things come into that. I have just written down few points. First corollary that comes out of oneness is, and in the light of that we shall see the gender imperative topic, that there is nothing like individual and other. Because individual is integrally connected with everything. Just to give one small example, any terrorist movement in the world, it starts with to kill other, but there is no other. So when you start killing other, ultimately they start killing each other. So there is nothing like individual and other. The second thing is, there is no competition in oneness. In body, there is no competition of the organs because there is one life. Similarly, the whole world, when it is interconnected, there cannot be competition, there has to be cooperation. The third is, there is no question of equality. The focus should be more on harmony because each one is unique. Where can we talk of equality? So these, taking these 3 points, the gender imperative we shall try to see. In that, the first thing that is to be taken into account is, as Swami Vivekananda used to say, the society has to pay homage to truth. The truth does not pay homage to society. Society has to pay homage to truth or perish. Now, what is the truth of existence? The whole existence is interconnected, interrelated, interdependent. And therefore, if man is insensitive to the needs, to the growth, to the development of a woman, somewhere it is going to affect even the development of man. He is somewhere incomplete. Or if a woman, she says that I have been oppressed and therefore I want to break all the bondages and I want to come out. I want to think of myself. I live for myself. She is again going against the truth, and the truth does not pay homage to society. The society has to pay homage to truth, otherwise the society perishes. The second point, you know, the problem of women is not a problem of women. It is a problem of a society. Somewhere our systems became unjust. Somewhere we became insensitive. And therefore, as it was very rightly pointed out by the moderator, that this should not have been only the women talking about it. There should have been even the men, because it is a problem of society. If a thorn pricks my leg, it is not the problem of leg, it is the problem of whole body. I will just give one very small example. Once we were talking with the rural women about the nutrition. You know, one woman, she was just sitting like that. I knew her very well. Afterwards, I asked her, why you were not interested? She told, what you are all talking, do you think we don't know what is nutritious and what is not? We do take care of our children. I told, but there is such a big problem of malnutrition among our women. She told, because you don't know the problem. See, we cook whatever is limited, and when we serve, generally we serve the men folk first and the children, and rarely the vegetables remain for us. Whatever remains we eat. And then I realized the problem of malnutrition of women, we should not talk with women, we should talk with the men. They should be sensitive enough. So this is what, it is a problem of a society and not problem of women. And the third thing, while adopting to the changes that are required as per the time, we should also see that we retain the characteristics of women. Because a woman is mother, whether we, whatever it is she who is going to nurture a child in her womb for 9 months. So her thinking, her development, her self-dignity, her self-esteem, everything is going to affect the wholesome, the integral growth of the child. And therefore, this characteristic of a woman, that she is the mother of humanity, that has to be retained, that has to be nurtured. And therefore, what is the path ahead? There is no need to empower women. Women herself are power. They are Shakti. They are the forms of Jagat Janani. Only thing is that we need to increase the participation of women in the human development, total human progress. Why? Because she is a spiritual power. She has, in Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavan Sri Krishna says, Kirti Shri Vakchanarinam Smrutir Medha Dhruti Kshama. I won't explain that. So when we say participation should increase, three things should increase in that. One is the attitude towards woman, that she is capable enough to do, to contribute. Second, the facilities. A woman requires certain facilities. And third is the security. Then the second point for the path, we have to emphasize on dharma and not on the rights. Because when a man is ill-treating a woman, it's not telling a woman that you fight and come out. That will only further disintegrate our society. But it is, we have to sensitize the man towards his dharma, towards his wife, his daughter, his mother, or even a woman on the road. So emphasize on dharma and not on the rights. So that's what the paradigm, it is, we have to usher in the paradigm of dharma, which will lead to harmony. And the third is, which Tulsi Gabbard, she referred to it, that it is the servant leadership. A woman, she really can lead her family, even if she is working in some institute or where. All that she can do because she has some inherent qualities which connects. And therefore, she is only to be made aware. She already is serving all these years, all these centuries. It is because of her, whatever it is, that the humanity has come up to this. And the last part is, it is the attitude towards the women which matters. When we talk about the security of women, we generally try to go for laws and regulations. We try to otherwise try to cover her or enclose her, or just put some limitations on her movement. But really speaking, the real security for a woman is in the eyes of a man. How a man is nurtured, spiritually evolved to look at a woman. And that's what in Indian culture, from the beginning, the efforts were there, that she is your mother. She represents the motherhood which nurtures the humanity. She is Jagat Janani Swarupa, as we tell. That doesn't mean that if from the childhood a child is brought up with this thought, if he looks any woman, really he will think as mother. Or no lesser thought or a base thought will come in his mind. It's not like that. It could come, but still it will temperate, it will moderate his behavior. It may come at the thought level, but it will not come at his action level if this is what is inculcated in the child. I shall just conclude with a very small anecdote of Sri Ramakrishna. When he was in his sadhana, he was mad after mother, means after Jagat Janani, had to have the Ishwar darshan. And it was at that time, the Mathur Babu thought that he has become mad, I must bring him down on the earth. He is, married very late, and his wife is also in a village, so he thought he will take him to prostitute. So he took him to a prostitute. He thought he may protest, but he was sitting, the prostitute, when she was singing. Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa was looking at her and listening to her song. So Mathur Babu thought whatever he had decided has happened. And at that, after the song was over, Sri Ramakrishna looked at her and told, "Mother, what all forms you take?" The prostitute cried. She said, "First time a man who has come to me could see the motherhood in me." So it is that spiritual nurturing of a human being where lies the security of a woman. Thank you.
Good afternoon and namaskar. I am here today to try and put a new idea into all our heads. What I ask of all of you today is that we re-evaluate the economic contribution of women in our country. I'm here to talk about the economics of the gender imperative in India. I hope that by the time I've finished my little presentation, we will all be agreeable to accepting and recognizing the recurring cost that the lack of attention paid to women's economic contribution that already exists in our country and the violence that is perpetrated against women in India costs our exchequer, literally. Now let me explain. I'm sure many of you, everybody here is extremely eminent in their own fields, and many of you already know that the UNDP says, in 2009 this study said, that while 67% of the work is done by women all over the world, they own only 1% of property and they earn only 10% of global income. Now in so-called developing countries, this proportion is obviously higher in the sense that more work is done and less income is earned by women, because infrastructure and technology use is limited to what is called the formal sector. And women's participation in that sector is the least. Moreover, most economic estimates value only what is called direct output. That is, if you're looking at tea, only the tea packet that comes out to you, which is produced by one of the multinational or big companies, the value of that is taken. The work that is done behind, for example, in the tea industry, it's the women who pluck most of the tea leaves, all the tea leaves, from what I could see anywhere I went in India, whether it's Darjeeling or Kodaikanal or anywhere else. But their work is undervalued. It's not taken into consideration. Therefore, you will find women's contribution to GDP is not even part of our economic calculations. Like the tea industry, there are many examples I could place before you. Fishing. Men go out and catch the fish, yes, but once they bring the fish to shore, all the other work is done by women. Cleaning, collecting, cutting, selling, even, getting the money for after selling the fish, and then the money is of course taken away from them. Just like this, look at floriculture. Women are documented to do more than 60% of the work across the board, whether it's in Assam or in Kerala, anywhere in the country, across the world in fact, but they still don't have control over any of the income that comes. And then let me move on to something that's called non-timber forest products, everything but wood. It includes bamboo, jute, grass, mushrooms, everything that we call jadi booty, all our forest products. Whether it's bhringraj, whether it's neem, there's a huge number of products. This, in fact, has an economic potential, by the way, of over about $5 to $10 billion in trade in India, if there's a certain amount of skilling done. And this is where women provide more than 87% of the labor. But it's not calculated as really part of GDP, their labor, because they do most of what's called the backroom work. I'm not even talking about household work, because that's the example that's given to most people most often. But let me just give you one figure. Look at this. 37 lakh crore, or in US dollar figures, 613 billion US dollars, in 2009 was women's contribution to India's GDP. The total GDP was 110 lakh crore, which is about 1.8 trillion. That is, our contribution was over 60% just household work. I'm not talking about the rest of the non-formal sector at all. Now let's look at something as simple as water. We're talking of river connectivity, we are talking of drought, we are talking of many problems around water. How many women are actually there in or involved in the planning process? As far as I could see, except for maybe a few senior bureaucrats, almost none. Maybe 0.0001% or 5%. You may think I'm exaggerating, but if you look, many of you are dealing with urban planning problems or rural water sanitation projects. Where are women being asked for their opinion, even in an informal way, say at the panchayat level? But it's women who collect, store, more often than not use, and distribute water, even in urban households. We are the ones who do the cooking, the cleaning. We teach our children how to use water, economically or not. Why is it that women have never been involved in even the planning of water distribution or water storage, or even water collection. You know, in the rural areas, 40 to 70 liters of water per head per person is supplied daily. In the urban areas, it's 135 liters per person daily. Just think, if the same amount of water was supplied even in the rural areas, what would the women do with this extra water? They will probably use it for kitchen gardens, for watering their milch animals or fowl, etc. And just think of what this would do to malnutrition levels. It would push up nutrition levels to the extent where whatever extra is being spent on that extra supply of water would be more than mitigated by subsidized programs like the ICDS. Most of the ICDS money today spent by the government of India goes on additionals, what's called supplementary nutrition that is provided to children from the ages of 2 to 6 or various other programs like that. Now, the percentage of that as a fraction of GDP, India's GDP currently, would be roughly about 1.7 to 1.9% if this was put into effect. I'm only giving you the economic imperative. Why it makes sense to consider women not as an investment, not just merely as CSR or charity cases. Aside from all the other spiritual, cultural, and intrinsic advantages in pushing the debate that men and women are intrinsically equal, some are better, some are not, and that's true regardless of gender. The fact is that today we are embarking, the Indian government is embarking on a huge investment and growth scenario. We're putting massive money into skilling. For the first time, we have a separate ministry for that. Think about it. If we can make India's women feel safe, whether it's at home, whether it's in public transport, whether it's in their schools, whether it's in their workplaces, do you know the amount of money this is going to help the country to save? At least 5 to 6% of GDP. And again, I'm not exaggerating. Unfortunately, we don't have studies either by the United Nations or the World Bank on anybody on India. But they have done similar studies in smaller countries like Vietnam and Cambodia. And there the figures are actually much higher. Populations are less, so the percentage is much higher. Think about the money we save if we stop violence against women. Women who are beaten up badly, who have acid thrown on them, who are burnt, who are raped, they all need medical treatment. Wouldn't we save money on that? And you know, what we hear reported every day across the board in India is literally the tip of the iceberg. Unfortunately, sometimes I think for me from this perspective, today I sit in a post, occupy a chair, where every day I have cases far worse than sometimes what we heard was done to Nirbhaya come in. And across the board, this has nothing to do with economics, the social standing of the lady or her family, her level of education, her caste, her religion, nothing. Across the board, women are having to bear the brunt of violence from family members, from friends, from often their husbands, strangers, of course. And the cost of that is huge to the Indian economy. You know, all of you must have heard the story about how Narayana Murthy actually started Infosys. He and his wife were ordinary middle class, an ordinary middle class couple working in government jobs, barely making ends meet. Narayana Murthy had, I think, tried to start another business earlier, which flopped. They went back to their government jobs. One day when he was discussing some new idea he had, which was at that time considered a very maverick idea, software when Infosys started was not considered a profitable thing at all in India. He was telling his wife that I'd like to do this. There are other people who also want to do it. We all really want to get together and do this start this new venture. And she said, well, why don't you do it? He says, but I don't have the money. I need 25,000 rupees. I don't have the money. So what did she turn around and say? She said, look, when I got married, like many Indian women across India, my mother told me that a good wife always saves a little money without her husband's knowledge. I have saved 25,000 rupees. Take it. He took it. And that 25,000 has grown into a multi-billion-dollar industry today. How did it come about? An average Indian woman's habit of thrift. I'm not trying to say that this is the only thrift story that I want to tell you about. The other one is just consider the lakhs of women, millions of women in India who are members of self-help groups, who save 1 rupee every day sometimes, 25 rupees a month sometimes, 100 rupees a month, depending on how much they can put away. Their money is with the Indian banks. Just think of how much that money is, and if it wasn't there, how much poorer our banks would be. I told you about the non-forest timber product. You know, it's estimated that if we skill women, especially in that sector, not only do we cover the entire so-called Naxal area, down from Andhra Pradesh, it includes even parts of Maharashtra and all indigenous populations, right up to Sikkim. Nepal is not part of India, but I'm saying up to the border of Nepal. Almost every state in India is covered. That can generate in the next 10 years at least 10 billion in exports for India. We have companies like Dabur's, including Baba Ramdev's company. Their entire industry or much of their income is built on what? On the work that women do. It's again not part of our GDP. And we really don't think of women as economic investment for this country. So today I want to flag with all of you. You all are the policy makers. You all are the people who will take ideas forward. I'd like to put this to you. Don't you think it's time that we invested in our Indian woman? Whether it is by preventing them from being killed in their mother's wombs, which also costs money, because basically either the woman dies if she goes to a maverick, that is an untrained person, or we do go to hospitals. And why do you think doctors keep doing it? Because they make a lot of money. But that's not the way the economy should be run. Why don't we stop looking at women merely as welfare? We're not welfare. Every woman who's sitting here today in this room, on the dais or even below, we're not welfare. We've come up because we are competent. But we've also come up because we were given the opportunity to be educated and trained. All of us contribute in our own way, productively. Like I said, this is not a fight between man and woman. Gender is not about man versus woman. I agree with what Jayaji said, that there are many men who should also, I also wish that there were at least a couple of men up on stage who can give their perspective. Because for any change to be sustainable, man and woman have to be on board. And there are more than enough men who have supported women in their lives. All of us, again, here are examples of that. I have said ad nauseum that I'm one of those extraordinarily lucky women who was never taught that you're a girl, so you can't do this. I never taught by anybody in my family. But that's very rare. I see in this country increasingly, perhaps unfortunately today, again, let me reflect something that Jayaji said. My mother used to say that I don't understand why you young girls are so afraid. So what if you're a girl? If you want to do it, you can do it. But I hear that being said less and less to our daughters, to our friends, to women in India today. I'd just like to put this to all of you. India is now embarking on this huge investment drive. I hope that I would have put this idea into your heads that it's time to invest in our girls. Because if we do, along with them, the country itself will grow. Thank you.
I'd like to begin with thanking India Foundation for inviting me to this remarkable event. You've really gathered an impressive array of speakers, and it's been a very enriching experience, and one of the few times when I don't feel the odd person out. There's a whole biradari of us agreeing on a lot of things and basic approaches. But like all previous speakers, I too would like to urge the organizers that in the next round, please don't confine us to the Zanana Dabba existence that you've done. This kind of ghettoization is particularly alien to our history because even in our theology, feminine is given central place. the woman in this land was not created out of Adam's rib. In India, she's Shakti incarnate, the energizing power behind the universe. And even male gods came to the female goddess, the mother goddess, for protection. It's also important to note that while male gods are revered, it's the female goddesses, especially in their non-concert avatars as Durga, Kali, they're not wives, that they are feared. And even male gods come to them for protection. It's also noteworthy that in this country, we did not burn our learned women at the stakes, as did Europe. It's not just scholars like Gargi, Maitreyi, but also our spiritual leaders like Mahadevi Akka, Andal, Lal Ded, Mirabai, Bahinabai, and a host of others who became revered social leaders. They were considered leaders of society. Men and women alike revered them, followed them. They weren't just women leaders. We also know that large parts of India, not just Kerala and Manipur, had matrilineal family structures where property and lineage came through the mother's line. Now, this is not at all to suggest that all was hunky-dory throughout ages. Problems did exist and got intensified in the last few hundred years, especially in the regions that witnessed repeated foreign invasions. As a result, female infanticide, low sex ratio, putting women in seclusion, parda, depriving women of inheritance rights and education, and marginalizing them in public life became a living reality of women's life in large parts of the country by 19th century. But it's significant that Indian women did not have to bear the burden of fighting against these social disabilities all on their own strength. Leading male reformers picked up cudgels on behalf of women, with women's rights issues becoming the core concern in all 19th century social and religious reform movements in different regions of India. The Arya Samaj in the north, Brahmo Samaj in Bengal, Pratna Samaj in Maharashtra, and their counterparts in other regions of India produced leading male reformers who devoted their entire lives to battle for strengthening women's rights in family and society. And it's important that women in India didn't have to bear the brunt of social attacks. Men like Lala Devraj, Maharshi Karve, Mahatma Phule, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, and a host of them took the brunt of social attack and led women forward to claim their rightful due in education and in public life. And we all know that in 20th century, with Mahatma Gandhi assuming the leadership of the freedom movement, women's issues once again became a core concern of the movement for Swaraj. Gandhi's choice of non-violence as a weapon of struggle was influenced by the fact that women tend to get pushed to the sidelines when violence and bloodshed dominate political life and public sphere. And he created respect-worthy space for women to lead the war against war and play an eminent role in the struggle for Swaraj. Consequently, all those rights for which women in the West had to wage bitter battles on their own steam, like the right to vote, right to hold public office, right to equal education, right to equal access to professions, etc., in India, and constitutional rights, they came without much of a fight. In fact, many of them were given to us on a silver platter. And maybe, perhaps for that reason, women's organizations in India became rather complacent in post-independence era, assuming that with a man like Nehru who was good at mouthing pious slogans, all would be well. Now, this complacency was shaken with the Status of Women Committee report in 1975, which showed an alarming decline in women's status in India, especially for rural women, poor women, working class women. Life expectancy, sex ratio indicators for health, education, employment, political participation, all painted a very grim picture. And India today is, in fact, one of the bottom line countries in the Human Development Index. Now, with that realization also came a new phase in women's activism in India. And Manushi, too, I would say, is a product of this realization. But very soon, international donor agencies stepped in and caught all the new women's organizations in their net. I consider it a good fortune that Manushi escaped that net and paid a very heavy price for it. Huge amounts of money were pumped in by the likes of Ford Foundation and other Western donor agencies into women's study centers as well as women's activism by propping up a whole range of feminist NGOs. If we contrast the current phase of women's activism with 19th century social reform movements and what took place during freedom movement under the leadership of Gandhi, the following things stand out. One, our indigenous reformers were rooted in their respective communities, castes and communities, and engaged directly with the social groups whose social cultural norms they wished to reform. They also dipped into their own pocket and contributed to social causes. They themselves became inspirational role models by their personal conduct because they practiced what they preached. They drew financial and moral support from within their own community and society and did not rely either on government or on legislation for changing social values, social norms, which they felt had become moribund and were harming societies. By contrast, the new NGOs, the feminist NGOs we have, no roots in their own community or society. They don't even talk to their neighbors. They're so busy networking internationally and jet setting that their neighbors don't even recognize them. They're totally dependent on foreign donor agency or government grants. Even their own relatives won't give them 200 rupees for the great work they're doing. They owe no accountability to the society who they claim to reform. They come as attacking outsiders and talk to society mainly through TV channels and print media, not directly. And they've chosen the role of what I'd call native informants. That is, the problem is here. Roop Kanwar Sati, so-called, takes place in Deorala. They don't go to Deorala and talk to people there or find out what happened, what were the facts of the case, how do we prevent such incidents in future. They run to Columbia University to present papers, they're in Stanford, they're all over the world, breast beating about Sati, about dowry victims, about this, that, and the other, and have very little time, really, to talk to those people whose practices they wish to change. They are in American universities, but you won't find them in Bhagalpur. Stanford, Columbia, Oxford, वहाँ पे बातें करनी है, वहाँ रोना धोना लेके जाना है. And the discourse has changed to that of gender war, thanks to their copycat feminist rhetoric. और हालत ये है कि जुकाम अमेरिका की बहनों को लगता है, छींके वो यहाँ मारने लगते हैं. The solutions are also often borrowed from the West, cut and paste legislation on many things. I don't have time to go into it, but I do urge some of those of you interested to have a look at this book called Zealous Reformers, Deadly Laws. It deals with this whole approach and the kind of legislation that we have witnessed in the last few decades. The focus of reform has shifted from dialogue with our own society to pressing for coercive and draconian laws, each one of them more disastrous than the other. Again, I wish I had time to discuss the provisions of these laws, so utterly idiotic that you'd think somebody from a lunatic asylum escaped and drafted. Even the definition of crimes is so bizarre. As I said, I've discussed it in my book, and maybe some other time you'll give me more time to explain what's so horrible about them. And absolutely no thought given to the practical implications of those laws. Anti-dowry law, domestic violence law, laws against obscene portrayal of women in the media. It's very significant. Women, feminists were the first ones to demand censorship laws. And now they say because others picked up the disease, they now say it's all right-wing politics. Laws against sex determination tests, anti-rape law, the new amendments. Every time an existing law fails, they ask for it to be made more draconian, bypass due process, and things that they wouldn't accept for anti-terrorist laws or dealing with terrorists, they want to be enshrined in laws dealing with family conflicts. It's noteworthy that the 19th century reformers and the early 20th century reformers, each of the issues that they picked up, they succeeded in solving those problems. Those problems are not alive anymore today because they counted on creating a new social and moral consensus in society. So society distanced itself from those practices. But if you look at our feminist NGOs and the legislation and the issues that they've picked up, has dowry disappeared? No. More. Has rape declined with all the new draconian, idiotic, lawless provisions added to it? No. Sex ratio decline? No, it's going further. I can give any number of examples. And at the same time, misuse of these laws become rampant. So there's today such a terrible backlash against women's rights activism that one feels afraid of calling oneself an NGO or feminist NGO. Thank God Manushi never did, so I feel safe that I distanced myself long ago. Now, it's clear that this functioning with imported ideologies and producing export quality activism has really proved disastrous results. They claim to now today, once upon a time they used to call themselves voluntary organizations. We said, what do you mean voluntary? You all take 5-star salaries and you're jet setting all the time. So they became NGOs, non-government organizations. Anybody who defines themselves by non-negativity is not going to produce positive results. Now, of course, the new nomenclature given by their funding agencies is CSOs, civil society organizations. But the truth is that they've declared virtual war on civil society. Even the British, when they passed new legislation, would go through elaborate discussions with local communities involved. But in this case, our Law Commission or even the Women's Commission, I hope this trend will change with you, ma'am, and with BJP. Don't ever invite the affected groups. It's only NGOs and CSOs who have substituted for society who come to. And they could get away with all this census laws because the Congress party, apart from outsourcing its political battles, BJP should know, you didn't have to fight the Congress as you had to fight the NGOs propped up by or supported by the Congress. But Congress had virtually surrendered governance as well as legislation to these NGOs, foreign-funded NGOs. And therefore, they were in all ministries, consultative role. The Law Commission only talked to them, didn't talk to society or social groups who were affected by the new laws that were being passed. And media also extended blind support to them. So much fear of these NGOs that, if I went to the law minister, and I did, to the previous law minister as well as the current, and I said, please appoint a commission to review these laws. They're not only practical, they're producing disastrous results. And what am I told? Madhuji, suicide करने को बोलते हो, नोच के खा जाएंगी ये आपकी फेमिनिस्ट बहनें मुझे. और कांग्रेस में तो एक ही जवाब था, सोनिया गांधी जी से जाके मिल लो ना. अब पता नहीं बीजेपी के लॉ मिनिस्टर डरते उतना ही हैं उनसे वैसे. मैं जाके देख चुकी हूँ, उन्होंने भी यही कहा. Political हाराकारी होगी, मधुजी, do some other things, create, etc. हमें क्यों आप इस वक्त फंसाने को उत्सुक हैं? Now, my request to BJP, you are a party that are more culturally sensitive. You're not rootless wonders. You value the sanskars of this society. You value the diverse cultures of this society. My request to you is, please appoint a commission. Maybe the Women's Commission will do it. Do a thorough, non-partisan review of the functioning of these laws. They're lawless laws. They couldn't pass muster in any civilized society, and certainly not in the societies which have funded this activism and funded this legislation. And I also believe that a new law needs to be passed by this government. You've been among the worst victims of foreign-funded activism. Give all the political freedom that NGOs deserve, including feminist NGOs, but please ban foreign funding of NGOs. Thank you.
good afternoon. Aloha, adios, but at last in Chinese, 你好. I want to start with my express of gratitude and appreciation for the Indian Foundation and the government of Goa for inviting me so I can join all of you and enjoying this banquet of thoughts and ideas. Thank you very much. As the introduction for me said, I come from Institute of World Religion, Chinese Academy of Social Science in Beijing, which is the largest institute for study of religions in the world. In terms of research staff, we cover all the religions. Now, Hinduism is the third largest religion in the world in terms of population. But sadly, we only have 3 of us to do some research on Hinduism. Luckily, we have this very good tradition of studying Hindu culture. Professor Xu Fancheng stayed in Pondicherry in Aurobindo Society ashram for 20 years. And he translated all the books written by Aurobindoji. I am glad I'm the first author of Hinduism in Chinese edition, in Chinese. It is my ambition to have better understanding of Hinduism, better than CNN and BBC. Okay, I'm not complaining, but this is an arranged talk. I mean, I'm not an expert on gender, but when I said I'm not campaigning because I think this is a very important issue. So for that, I think about 2 days, and I want to talk something differently. I don't have PPT because I don't have a power, and I don't have a point. Well, you know, whenever we talk about the Sino-Indian relations, we always start with ancient civilizations and huge population of these 2 countries. If we have 1/3 of world population, then we have 1/3 of women, right? So I'm talking about join together of the women in 2 countries to do something. At first, in intellectual level, I think we should start more of women's life and history in order to have better understanding of women. When I was in Ganga, the first girls' hostel in JNU, about 20 years ago, I'm expecting the Jabadi. In China, we call it Indian flying Jabadi. But I found none of this exist. Then the newspaper talked a lot about child marriage, the maintenance, rising about Shabano case, and dowry death. I was naive to think, oh, my Indian sister can turn the dowry problem into like bride price in China. Maybe that's slightly better. What I'm saying is that it is difficult to understand the other culture and the women and the man's life in different culture. And we cannot join the conclusion that this society is hopeless. What we are going to say is how difficult and how brave this woman to push forward. And I'm very appreciative about the progress the Indian women made in the long history. Now, at the government and the non-government organization level, I think it's important for us to join hands and work together. Action speaks louder. So in this term, I think the two countries can learn from each other to express the issues and to do the improvement of women's status. And my professor in School of Oriental and African Studies in London University has wrote a book, Lisa Crow. She wrote a book, Chinese Woman Since Mao. She said that no government in this world has done more than the Chinese government in terms of improvement of women's status. And everybody knows that Chairman Mao has a slogan like, women can hold up half of the heaven. And maybe you have noticed we Chinese women also made great progress in terms of this. Actually, if we can hold more than half of the heaven in terms of like Olympic gold medals and others. In that sense, I think maybe Chinese experience have something valuable for Indian women to learn. Like girls' education, we always attack for that and share the view that if you educate a man, you can educate an individual. If you educate women, you educate the whole family. And in terms of health care for pregnant women and delivered kids, and afterwards, and also a lot of things. I think maybe it's easier for Indian organizations to do something with Chinese women's organization. Because if you learn from very far and very advanced society's experience, maybe it's more difficult. Maybe it's more practical for learn from Chinese experience. I'm not sure. I just think if you can find something valuable, that's very good. And also, both Chinese society and Indian society, we don't value a lot of things, but they are, it's a social reality, like sexual workers. You know, in China, we used to have, in Shanghai in 20s, we used to have those election of president of flower states. That most beautiful prostitute become the president and have a minister. That is not the things now exist. But we have to manage and how to manage this kind of social reality in terms of anti-drugs and stop the diseases like AIDS and other diseases. I think it's very important. Both of the countries cannot turn a blind eye on this social reality. The third thing I want to say is that on the cultural level, I think you have to have this appreciation of the culture in terms of cultural exchange. The like and appreciation is a basic basis for the exchange of culture. In this term, I want to, again, point this Buddhist cultural exchange. You see, China now have half of Buddhists of the world. And Xuanzang and other monks who came to India, there are only very few records about these very few monks. But that's, in that period of time, it's a huge number of Chinese monks who want to find the truth and the way of realization for India, from India. What I mean is that Buddhism is not something that India gives to China. It's China's hardly very seriously searching for. That make this Buddhist culture become the very precious and the very core of Chinese culture. Now, in terms of this, I want to explore a little bit more religion. In China, in Chinese, 宗教, 宗 means sect, 教 means teaching or school. So 宗教, religion, in Chinese means schools of teachings. In that term, you can understand this, we Chinese, we do have a lot of religions, but we don't have, also have a multiple membership. And in terms of this, maybe we are not the organization of one particular religion, but when we deal with my relation with society, we use the teaching of Confucius. When we deal with the natural, maybe we use the teaching of Lao Tzu. And when we deal with death and other things, next life, we use the teaching of Buddhist. So that's the kind of religion in China you have to understand. So we are not so hopeless. We are not so, we do have this kind of way of life to love all this and draw from all these kind of religions, teachings. Now, the most important thing I want to say is that for joining hands of Chinese women and Indian women, we have to work together to solve the problem of human predicament. Now, for political decline, economical crisis, and moral problems, and environmental problems, we have very tough work to do. Why I especially mentioned the women instead of men, and you can see we women start from the spirit of aloha, and men who talk about economy first. And now, from the calculation of some experts, if we keep the life of, let's say, like pattern one, who use a lot of oil, use lots of items once and throw away, if we Chinese women, Indian women, Chinese men, Indian men, always consume the same amount of materials and resources, the experts said we need 8 Earths. Gandhiji has said that the Earth can fit all of us human beings, but not our greedy. So for this new pattern of life, we should creating pattern B. For our children, for ourselves. So in that case, I think the women of Chindia will use the wisdom of our own to contribute something for this matter, and we must have balanced life and respect our rivers and suns, the air, and all the natural resources. For that matter, we have to work very, very hard. Even it's a mission impossible for protection of Earth to guarantee the happy life of all of us, including the Tangsen Siva and their wives. So I will try brief of this to you, and I hope it's really the new world in front of us if we work together. And so the Chinese civilization and the Indian civilization will have much broad future in this world. So I will end with that. Namaste again. Thank you.
And I have a question for Madhu. I think you sort of, you didn't have time to get into more detail, but I think you sort of rightly pointed out that there's a certain kind of knee-jerk, I would call leftist feminist response to what are very real problems. And you have highlighted that that tends to be the imposition of draconian laws. My question is that you've identified the problem. Is there a non-left way of approaching the same problem? And if there is, what is the common sort of philosophical basis that drives the non-left response? Because the problems themselves, we all acknowledge, are real, right? Rape, for example, is a real problem. It's the solutions that are problematic.
Firstly, I didn't quite use the term left, and therefore you're putting me in the right spectrum. I'm in good company, if that's where you want me to be. It's not just right-left. Unfortunately, what would you call Congress party? Left? Really? Brainless then. I mean, they've allowed the left to lead them by the nose. That's different from being left. Secondly, don't forget that the support for this kind of activism and legislation is coming from very right-wing forces in America and Europe. The funding agencies, and a lot of them are also evangelical groups, mind you. Christian organizations are also pouring a lot of money into this kind of activism on human rights, on environment, on women's rights issues. And the entire spectrum, nobody dares stand up to them because they have captured media space, they have the power of these international networks. Itna shor macha dete hain, sab awazein dab jati. No other voice is allowed to be heard thanks to the power of the funding, the backers of these networks. And there's also, mind you, don't forget, the power of Western governments behind these. Ford Foundation doesn't work in isolation. It brings with it the clout of the American government as well. And atrocity mongering has been made into such a lucrative profession that left, right, center, everybody is in it, if you ask me. Unfortunately, I can't understand why, for example, BJP MPs have never come out with a critique of this kind of mindless, brainless legislation that we've been. If I were to read clauses of these laws, which have gone through all kinds of processes, you wouldn't believe it. And most of those who support these laws have never read those laws themselves. That's the tamasha we made our parliament to be. So it's not just leftism, they've captured all space. And the concerned groups, for example, this law against honor killings. Tell me who in BJP will oppose it, stand up in. I had to go to Supreme Court on behalf of Khap Panchayats to point out to the utter idiocy of the kind of law that the feminist NGOs had demanded and managed to get written from the Law Commission. The Law Commission never invited any of the Khap Panchayats for a discussion. The Supreme Court heard the case against Khaps in absentia for 3 years, in absentia, and they were ready to give a very hostile judgment and a very hostile law, which would be unconstitutional, and nobody dared oppose it. It's so politically incorrect to oppose it. I don't know how I've survived. Honestly, I'm very proud of my survival and courage. I mean, nothing else that I can claim for myself, but certainly. So the point I'm making, it's not just left, but there's more to it. And it's a direct attack on the social fabric. There's a method behind this madness. Destroy family as an institution, attacks all indigenous social organizations, and destroy the social fabric of India. Because that's the kind of society that's easy to manipulate.
Ma'am, since you've emphasized on the economic imperative, my submission to you is there are a whole lot of tasks that are done by women which don't have tangible economic value, but are nonetheless equally important or perhaps more important. What economic value would you give to a 24/7 job like homemaker? What economic value would you provide to motherhood? What economic value would you give to the sacrifices of Kasturba in enabling ordinary Mohandas to become a Mahatma. So there are a whole lot of meta-economical and mega-economical issues which need to be taken into account and not just give a reductionist perspective in terms of economic value to women's contribution.
On one degree, I agree with you that everything cannot be reduced to money. But the fact also remains that, unfortunately, because today the general perspective, and this is worldwide, not just India, but because I was talking about India, I talked only about India. Women's contribution to the economics of any country is not, is sort of taken for granted. I did give you a rough value that's put on what is called generally housewives' work. And it's talked about so contemptuously even by other women. It's not just, by the economists and the men in general, but even by other women. Housewives are very undervalued creatures because nobody gives them any respect for the sheer amount of hard work they do day after day with no holidays, with no medical pension, with nothing. And very rarely will you hear somebody saying thank you to a woman for doing housework. Now, that's why I said, aside from that, many women in India, I think not just India, many other countries too, we don't just do housework. We do our housework, we look after our children, we go to work, we actually earn much of the bacon, that is the bread and bacon that's spent in the house. But only women who are in the so-called formal sector, their contribution is even counted. What I was trying to say is that we need to look at women not merely as charity cases. People are not doing women a favor when we invest in skilling them, in educating them. We're actually doing entire society a favor. Because as has been pointed out even by her, that when you educate a woman, you educate the whole family. When you take women into planning, you will be looking at the practical, things of everyday life. Like Madhu said, that the ones at the grassroots are hardly ever considered, and women are at the grassroots. So that's what I meant. But some of it, sometimes we have to be a little reductionist, because unfortunately money is what really runs the world today, though it shouldn't.
I thought your critique of imported feminism was well argued, and I'm sympathetic to that point of view as well. I wonder what you think would be the contours of, given your critique that conventional feminism is at odds with Indian ethos, what would be the contours of an authentic indigenous feminism, a feminist movement or feminism in India? How would you define it? What would that look like?
See, the first requirement is that you learn to take seriously your own people and treat them with respect. You don't treat them as a subhuman species simply because you don't agree with some of their values or customs. Just to give you an example of this honor killing business, their own data shows that Khaps are involved in less than 3%, or not Khaps, Gotra issue is involved only in 3% of honor killings. The rest is about religion, caste, this, that, and the other. And yet, Women's Commission not only funded this study, but argued against its own data, the previous Women's Commission, not you, ma'am, that Khaps should be banned. Khaps should be banned. And that Gotra, and the kind of rhetoric we've heard, barbaric, medieval relics, they have no business to exist, these Khaps should be banned out of existence. Right to association is a fundamental right promised in our constitution. You're saying ban them, don't allow them to exist. Treat them as a subhuman species who should be banished out. Supreme Court judges have made these kind of comments because the kind of demonization of our society that's become fashionable, politically fashionable and politically very lucrative under the guise of protecting human rights, women's rights and all. The first thing is you have to own up that society. You earn the moral right to ask for social reform only if you treat the people as their own. And it took me no time to enter into dialogue with Khap representatives. In no time, they were willing to pass resolutions condemning honor killings, distancing themselves from them, but insisting that the sanctity of Gotra be recognized. And why not? that's there. You know, the point that I'm trying to make is first learn to own up your own society. Don't come as attacking outsiders. The rest will come automatically.
I'm Anne-Marie Nizin from Belgium. I will come for another panel, but I'm very interested in this one because I could imagine you feel I am a feminist of the European side. We have rebuilt 10 years ago a big NGO in Paris who was created by Simone de Beauvoir with an objective of putting international law for women's rights into implementation. And I will be, especially for you, it's Lalita, because I have also been chair of the Women Council in Belgium, that maybe, even if we believe, of course we have to know our population, we have to know the tradition, how to come out, and but there is an international women's solidarity. And that's what I feel really we should be able to ask UN to go further. They have a good instrument, CEDAW, but I want to have your feeling about, because in the news, from some years now, we have a lot of information about rape in India, rape in the streets, rape in the buses and everything. And maybe it is a real important topic for the image of India, objective of our presence here, in the whole international sphere. So I want to have your comment about the way you see, from an Indian Women Council point of view, how to put UN to do more.
When I first initiated a dialogue with UN Women after I took charge at the Commission, the first thing they told me was, we have no money, you have to talk to UNDP. So I did do that. And the problem is that the UN, and I'm being very blunt here and very apolitical, so I don't know what's going to happen to me tomorrow. Maybe I'll have to resign or something. The press will certainly pounce down my throat. The problem is that the UN is dominated by a very Western, namely the US and Canada. And it is not to the benefit, perhaps, of those countries to actually portray India as a country where, yes, problems exist, but there are also many solutions and many success stories. Recently, there was something reported in the press where 2 young girls beat up a fellow on a bus because he was trying to harass them. And whatever may have been later on said by the press or others who tried to say they were actually gundas, that is, the girls themselves were unpleasant characters, etc., and went about beating up women as a matter of course, not just on the bus, and they were being harassed, when they were being harassed. But the fact is that we have an equal number of success stories also. Recently, we had a lady who was unfortunately, and should not have been, raped in a taxi. But that lady had the guts and the presence of mind to take a photograph of the driver. And eventually that guy was caught on that particular occasion because the girl had exactly the presence of mind and the courage after going through what she did. Because she took a photograph of the driver and noted down the taxi number. Therefore, the police were able to catch him quickly. There was no excuses left for not punishing that guy or catching him immediately. There are gaps. But then it's not just India that has this problem. Rape exists all over the world. I'm not trying to make excuses. No woman should be raped anywhere in the world by anybody. But you're right, the portrayal of the Indian media of India, and this is something that when I was party spokesperson of the BJP for a year, I got very disillusioned with the media. Recently, after taking charge as Women's Commission Chairman, I was asked to make a comment on something. And I said what was the truth. I said, look, I work 7 days a week, but unfortunately government offices are closed Saturday and Sunday. So what I can do over the phone, etc., to take notice of this particular issue, I will do. But on Monday, I will send the official communication. That became a huge topic the next day in the media, and I was said, why don't you resign, etc., etc. Finally, I got angry and I said, I will resign. It's just a post. But will my resigning help any woman in distress? Then, of course, that bit was hastily blanked out by the press, etc. But I think that perhaps a request could be made. I don't know if they will listen, but there are some very senior and very genuine people from the press at the conference, that it's possibly the media of India itself which portrays more the negativity of what happens in our society than what is positive. and that could be a request that, yes, that could be a request that is made to them, whether it is political or about our social fabric, etc. It is true that we are today, due to many unfortunate influences over the last 300-400 years, become an extremely patriarchal society. But change is there. I myself can see it over the last 10 or 20 years of my work in the social sector. Change takes time. It is resisted extremely, vociferously, and much of it by the so-called Western feminist culture that Madhu was talking about, where the concept of family, the concept of, our culture being very important, etc., is being slowly diminished by the aggressive feminine response that just doesn't make any change sustainable.
True, the kind of efforts of a women are beyond measure, our contribution, but wherever they are participating in the economic activities, that is always accounted in the national income of the country. And ma'am, I was just wondering, when you were giving some examples here, on what basis this information was given to us that that's not part of the GDP? Do you mean to say that when they are doing the jobs, for example, plucking the tea leaves, are they not paid at all? Because if they are paid, that ultimately gets reflected in the value of the final product. So I would seek a clarification on this, please.
No, when women labor is paid, since you said plucking of leaves, I'll just give you two examples. Fishing and the tea industry. They're paid in cash. It doesn't reflect as money that is being paid to women. It goes into the average cost of what the tea or the actual output is, and it's not gender disaggregated.
No,
That is the problem.
No, gender disaggregation is altogether different issue, but it very much gets accounted in the GDP of the country because it is part of the cost that I'm making for the product. It is there very much.
We'll discuss it over lunch.
Yeah,
But because it's gender disaggregated, there is no credit that goes to the woman.
Altogether different issue, ma'am. That's altogether different issue. Okay, we can have a discussion.
Thank you
in
very much for this really interesting, lively session.